Welcome to Dream Farm. On today's episode, I want to follow up on the topic that I started last week. I was talking about the perfect 1 acre food plot, and I got sidetracked and I started talking about whether you should plant grain or greens. So my greens, typically I'd classify them as clover, alfalfa, chicory, brassicas. That would be like your turnips and radishes, dwarf Essex rape. And I would put the cereal grains in that category too, even though the word grain is in their name. I'm still going to call those greens, because normally during the time when the deer would be feeding on them, they're eating the greens. So for grains, I'm going to call soybeans, corn, sorghum, and those are the primary ones that people consider when they're planting a grain food plot. So the real question is, which one is better? Is grains better than greens, or vice versa? And what percentage of your food plot acres should you commit to one versus the other? Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute Food Plot Blends, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Hoyt Archery, Wildlife Farming, and PH Outdoors. So let's start with which one is better. I think that during the summer, spring and summer, the greens are better, even early fall. I think the deer get more out of them. There's more protein in the clover, alfalfa. Those are really good, healthy, very nutritious forage foods. And there's a lot of good blends on the market. I like blends. I mentioned that in the last episode. I lean towards the Whitetail Institute products. I've been using those for a long time, and I've been doing a little bit of consulting with those guys, helping them with some of their new mixes and some of their new products that they're coming out with. And so I think that from the standpoint of what is the best food for the deer during the spring and the summer and the early fall, I think it's clover, chicory, alfalfa, and then to a lesser extent, the brassicas, the fall rye, winter wheat, those types of plantings. Then as you get into the later fall and the early part of the winter, that's when the deer really start shifting over to the grains. And we've talked about the fact that they really strive to find carbohydrates because they're needing that energy source in order to stay warm, to fuel their metabolism. It's just really good for them to, get more energy during that time of the year. They can convert protein into energy. All the experts have told me that, there's nothing wrong with protein, as a food source for the deer. But given their choice, when it gets cold, they're going to look for something with carbohydrates in it. So that's where the grains really come in. And to be honest with you, you don't really need food plots to be successful during the rut. It's nice to have spots like that where the deer maybe will concentrate and funnel into and out of, like maybe you have a little small food plot back in the timber, or something small, a little kill plot around the edge, someplace that the deer can go to and not feel like they're exposed. Those are rut hunting hotspots, but you can kill those same deer other places. You don't have to have food plots to be successful during the rut. Early season, the food sources are really beneficial because the deer are on, food to bed, back to food, back to bed. That's their pattern during the early season. They get out of their beds in the evenings, they work towards the food sources, and then back towards their bedding areas sometime during the night. If you got a lot of acorns like we did last year, that can mess up your food plots too and make them less effective. So let's just say in general, the food plots aren't as effective during the early parts of the bow season as what they really are at the end. And that's why I really like having, some strong grains to back up my greens. The greens are good for the overall health and nutrition of the deer, because they can feed on those all spring, all summer, early fall. It's really good for them. It's healthy food. And then you get into the late season, and the deer are really looking for that, that extra bump, like we talked about. So that's when the food plots make a big difference. If you don't have a feeding area or a food source during the late season, that can be really, really tough hunting. I mean, it's tough hunting anyway with the bow. I mean, even at its best, late season is really tough bow hunting. But if you don't have food, something that the deer are attracted to, I'm not saying it's impossible, but gosh, you can spend a lot of time and not have any success. So that's why I really feel like grains are super important. Even though the greens make up a big part of the deer's diet throughout the year, the grain side of your food plot, mix has to be pretty strong, because you want that there in the late fall and the winter, because that's when food plots really make a difference to your hunting strategy, and that's really when the deer are starting to feel more stressed too. Gosh, these buffalo gnats are tearing me up. I don't know if you're seeing them buzzing around, but it's a bad time of the year for those. They call them black flies up in Canada. When we go up there fishing, those things drive us nuts. I have found a good spray for that. I think it's called Bug Soother. Yes, that's it. It's like a natural extract. It's got vanilla and stuff in it, but gosh dang, I mean, we've had some really miserable times with these black flies. But anyway, I digress. So getting back to the grains, between picking what grain is best, that's sort of a do you like Ford or do you like Chevy? They're all effective during that late season. I like corn when it's really cold, but this past season, I mean, the deer didn't respond to the corn at all. They actually were looking more at the sorghum, and as a result of that, I'm gonna plant more sorghum this year. I'm gonna plant some stuff that Whitetail Institute is sending me to experiment with. So I'm excited about that, to see if I can find something that is really attractive to the deer. So corn is generally the #1 draw when it gets cold. If it's not super cold, it seems like the deer favor the beans. I'd say overall, if you had to say what is a deer's favorite grain, I think it's beans. But when it gets really cold, then the corn becomes more attractive. But between the corn, the sorghum, and the beans, the deer are going to eat them all. It's just a question of which ones are they going to be maybe running to versus walking to the others. So it's not like they're going to shun the corn to eat the beans. So anyway, my point is, what you plant on the greens side of your food plot mix isn't as critical as how much of it you plant. You need enough so that there's some there, ideally through the winter. You don't really want to just feed the deer until the hunting season is over with, because that's just a little bit self-serving. Ideally, you're trying to create the healthiest possible deer, and that means that you've got to look after their nutrition throughout the winter, not just up until the end of the hunting season. So a little bit of experimentation is going to tell you, how much of that you need in order to get, enough through into the, through the winter, and it's probably more than most people think. Unfortunately, I feel like, or I've mentioned it before, that 5% of your total land mass, if it's in some kind of a food that the deer can feed on throughout the fall and winter, that's ideal. So if you're hunting 200 acres, that'd be 10 acres of food. And that's probably on the low end, but that's a pretty good number to shoot for. That's what I've been trying to do on our farm. I'm not quite there yet. I'm still a little bit short of the 5%, but there's quite a bit of ag there, and I don't have a super high deer density, but little by little over time, I'm gonna have to bump up and get closer to that 5% myself. So out of the 5% total food, I'd say I like 2/3 to be grain and 1/3 to be greens. So I'd be looking at, if I had 30 acres, I'd want 20 acres of grain and 10 acres of greens. And we talked in the last episode about how you break up your greens. I'm a fan of clover and brassicas. And the other thing that's really nice about the brassicas too, I've been using this wintergreens blend, and I can broadcast it right into my soybeans. And as the beans are starting to dry down and the leaves are starting to fall off, then the brassicas from the wintergreen blend is coming up through the beans. So you kind of get, the two for the price of one with soybeans, because you can broadcast those wintergreens right into them. So that kind of brings this whole thing full circle. Like I said, If you have 1 acre food plot like we talked about last episode, focus on, something that the deer can't wipe out. But if you have more acres to work with, then you can start shifting over to the grains, and that's something that you want to be there for that late season. So you don't want to have small acreages of the grains because the deer will wipe you out during the summer. I'm sure we could talk about this, or I could, for hours, because there's a lot of variables related to soil quality, food plot locations, deer densities, competition from your neighbors, how much ag is in the area. It's not so simple as to just say, here's the answer, because there's a lot more variables to consider. But just for the sake of argument, let's just say 5% of your total acres in food plots, and of those 5%, ideally 2/3 would be grains. Well, I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Dream Farm. And remember to always dream big.